Okay, let's jump right in. We're looking at this material, outlining the U.S. government, its design, how it's evolved, some core principles, and key events.
That's right. The idea is to really pull out the essentials, how the American system is structured and how it functions. What's interesting is seeing how all these different parts connect the framework, individual rights, even economic factors.
So our aim here is to give you a clear, structured look at these critical aspects straight from this material. Let's get into it.
Okay, first up, the basic organization of power. Federalism. This material describes it as, well, a system where authority is shared between the national government and the state governments. The U.S. was actually the first to try this.
So the national government handles the big picture stuff.
Yeah, things like national defense, managing commerce between states, those are its enumerated powers, listed in Article 1, Section 8. Plus, there are implied powers, things needed to carry out the listed ones, that necessary and proper clause.
The McCulloch v. Maryland case helped define that, didn't it?
Exactly. That case really solidified the idea of implied national powers. Then, the states keep powers over local issues. Think education, police forces, local safety. Those are the reserve powers under the 10th Amendment.
But they also share some powers.
Concurrent powers, like taxation, both levels can tax. And a key rule here is the supremacy clause in Article 6. Basically, if there's a conflict, valid national law wins out over state law.
Like the example often used with marijuana laws, state versus federal.
Precisely. Even if states legalize, federal law technically remains supreme, though enforcement can be, well, inconsistent.
Now, this balance, this federalism thing, it hasn't always looked the same, has it? The material suggests it's shifted quite a bit.
Oh, absolutely. It's evolved. The early period, say 1789 to 1865, was really focused on just holding the nation together, the indestructible union idea. You had early Supreme Court cases strengthening national power, like McCulloch or Gibbons v. Ogden.
But that also led to huge tensions over states' rights.
Huge, especially around slavery, ultimately leading to the Civil War. After the war, from about 1865 to 1937, you get what's called dual federalism. Think of it like a layer cake clearer separation between federal and state roles. This was partly influenced by laissez-faire economic ideas, limiting government intervention.
But big events changed that again, right? Like the Great Depression.
Exactly. Since around 1937, we've been in what's often called contemporary federalism or cooperative federalism. It's more like a marble cake. Responsibilities are much more mixed, intertwined. Often this was pushed by public demand for government action, like with the New Deal or later the Great Society programs like Medicare and Medicaid.
And there's even been some pushback, trying to send power back to the states.
Yeah, that's the devolution trend mentioned. It's an ongoing tension.
Okay, so power divided between national and state. But the material also stresses division within the national government.
Yes, that's crucial, separation of powers. The Constitution divides the national government into 3 distinct branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. The goal was to prevent any one entity from becoming too dominant.
And then they added another layer.
Checks and balances. This is maybe the really clever part. Each branch is given ways to limit the power of the others. For example, Congress makes laws, but the president can veto them. Congress can impeach the president. The courts can review laws and declare them unconstitutional.
That sounds like it could lead to conflict.
It often does, but it's designed that way. It forces compromise and prevents hasty action. It was seen as an improvement over some early state governments where one branch, like the legislature, had way too much sway.
So the legislative branch is Congress, they make the laws. The executive is the president, they enforce the laws.
Right.
And the judicial branch, the courts, they interpret the laws.
That's the basic framework.
Okay, let's zoom in on Congress. It's bicameral, meaning 2 parts.
Right. The House of Representatives and the Senate. The House has 435 members based on each state's population. They serve 2-year terms, so they're thought to be more responsive to immediate public concerns. Revenue bills have to start in the House, and they initiate impeachment.
And the Senate is different.
Very different. 100 members, 2 per state, regardless of population size. They serve 6-year terms, but staggered, so only about a third are up for election every 2 years. This was intended to make the Senate a more deliberative, stabilizing body.
The material mentions their unique powers, too, advice and consent.
Yes, on presidential appointments, cabinet secretaries, federal judges, ambassadors, they need the Senate's okay. And the Senate ratifies treaties, needing a 2/3 vote. They also hold the trial if the House impeaches someone, and the vice president. They preside over the Senate and cast tie-breaking votes.
So Congress does more than just pass laws.
Oh, yeah. They declare war, regulate commerce, control the budget, taxing and spending, and importantly, they oversee how the laws are actually carried out by the executive branch. A lot of the real nitty-gritty work happens in committees.
And politics obviously plays a huge role. The material notes increasing polarization.
Definitely. Especially since the 1990s or so. Members vote much more strictly along party lines now than they used to. This contributes to legislative gridlock. It's harder to get things done when the parties are so opposed.
And getting elected or reelected seems easier if you're already there.
Incumbency advantage is real. The material points out high re-election rates, partly because districts are often drawn to favor one party, and incumbents just have more resources and name recognition than challengers.
Okay, let's shift to the executive branch, the presidency.
The president. Head of state, head of government, commander-in-chief. Elected every 4 years, and the 22nd Amendment limits them to 2 terms.
The powers listed are pretty substantial. Veto power over laws.
Though Congress can override with a supermajority, they issue executive orders, appoint officials, judges, agency heads with Senate confirmation, remember? They negotiate treaties again, Senate ratification needed. Big role in foreign policy, and they can grant pardons.
And the vice president is there to support and succeed if necessary.
Correct. Then there's the structure supporting the president, the cabinet heads of the 15 executive departments they advise, and then the executive office of the president, the EOP.
That's like the White House staff.
Yeah, includes the White House Office, National Security Council, Office of Management and Budget. These are folks directly under the president's control. And the material notes they've become increasingly involved in making policy, sometimes roles that used to be handled more by the agencies themselves.
Which brings us to the bureaucracy. It sounds massive.
It is. Millions of civilian employees work in federal agencies, cabinet departments like State or Treasury, independent agencies like the EPA, CIA, NASA, the Federal Reserve. Their job is to implement the laws Congress passes and create regulations.
And they live and die by their budgets, right?
Absolutely. There's a constant negotiation between the agencies, the president, usually via OMB, and Congress over funding. And while there are efforts, like the Senior Executive Service, to put people with expertise in charge who are also responsive to the president, agencies often develop their own cultures and loyalties to their specific missions.
The view of the presidency itself seems to swing back and forth.
Yeah, the material mentions terms like imperial presidency when it seems too powerful, then imperiled when it seems too weak, then maybe heroic again. It's certainly more powerful now than the founders probably imagined, partly because the president is the only official elected by the whole country.
But acting alone has risks.
Definitely. Unilateral actions, like executive orders, can be seen as an abuse of power that can lead to backlash, legal challenges, even impeachment proceedings, which the material brings up regarding President Trump.
Still, it's a powerful office, but maybe not all powerful.
Right. A lot is outside the president's control, especially the economy. Presidential success often depends on things like the state of the nation, where they are in their term. That early honeymoon period is often crucial, and crucially, whether their party controls Congress.
Okay, branch number 3, the judicial branch, the federal courts.
Established by Article 3. Their job is interpreting laws and the Constitution. At the bottom are the district courts, 94 of them. These are the trial courts, where federal cases start.
And appeals courts.
Yep. 13 courts of appeals, or circuit courts. They review decisions from the district courts to see if legal errors were made. No new trials, no witnesses, just reviewing the legal arguments.
And the highest court is the Supreme Court.
It's the Supreme Court of the United States. Chief Justice plus 8 associate justices. It's the final court of appeal for cases involving federal law and the Constitution. It also has limited original jurisdiction cases that start there, mostly involving states.
Now, a really key power the courts have isn't actually written in the Constitution.
You're talking about judicial review. That's right. It was established by the court itself under Chief Justice John Marshall in the landmark 1803 case Marbury v. Madison.
And what does it mean, exactly?
It means the courts have the authority to review actions taken by the other branches, laws passed by Congress, actions by the president or federal agencies, and determine if they are constitutional. If they find an action violates the Constitution, they can declare it void.
So the Supreme Court gets the final say on what the Constitution means.
Essentially, yes. And the material stresses that lower federal courts and even state courts dealing with federal issues have to follow the precedents set by the Supreme Court.
Getting appointed as a federal judge sounds like a big deal and very political.
It is highly politicized, especially Supreme Court appointments. The president nominates, but the Senate must confirm that advice and consent again. It's a major focus of political battles.
And they serve for life.
During good behavior, which effectively means life tenure unless they're impeached and removed, which is very rare. This is designed to insulate them from political pressure, give them independence. The material notes a significant change in 2017 when the Senate eliminated the filibuster for Supreme Court nominees, making it easier to confirm justices with just a simple majority, usually along party lines.
But it's important to remember most legal cases don't happen in federal court.
That's a great point. Over 95% of all court cases in the U.S. happen in state or local courts. They handle the vast majority of legal disputes. And while federal judges strive for impartiality, the materials do acknowledge that partisan backgrounds can sometimes influence decisions, though many lower court cases are pretty straightforward applications of law.
Let's turn to individual rights and liberties. The Supreme Court seems central here, too.
Absolutely vital, especially in applying the Bill of Rights to the states. That process, called selective incorporation, happened over many decades using the 14th Amendment. It means states also have to respect most of the rights listed in the first 10 amendments.
The material gives some key examples the court has shaped. The right to bear arms.
Yes, cases like Heller and McDonald affirmed an individual right to possess firearms, though with limits.
The right to privacy.
Stemming from Griswold, protecting marital privacy and later extended. Think about the Riley case saying police generally need a warrant to search your cell phone. That's a modern privacy protection.
And rights for people accused of crimes.
Crucial ones. Mapp v. Ohio dealt with illegally obtained evidence, the exclusionary rule. Miranda v. Arizona gave us the famous Miranda rights, the right to remain silent and have an attorney. And more recently, Carpenter addressed how digital information, like cell phone location data, is protected. The court also acted against gender discrimination, like in the United States v. Virginia case involving the Virginia Military Institute. Freedom of speech and assembly also get mentioned, with cases showing that these rights are strongly protected, even when the speech or assembly is unpopular or might provoke a negative reaction.
But the documents are clear. These rights aren't always experienced equally.
No, unfortunately not. They point to issues like racial profiling in policing, which disproportionately affects minority communities. Cases like those involving George Floyd and Michael Brown are cited as examples of police brutality that sparked widespread protests, like the Black Lives Matter movement, highlighting ongoing systemic inequalities.
And there's a specific challenge mentioned regarding the right to a lawyer.
Yes, the right to counsel. The landmark Gideon v. Wainwright case from 1963 established that states must provide a lawyer to poor defendants in serious criminal cases. It's a fundamental right.
But there are problems making that right effective.
Big problems. The material highlights chronic underfunding of public defender offices. This leads to huge caseloads, meaning defenders might have very little time to spend on each case. It can result in what's sometimes called meet 'em and plead 'em justice, where defendants feel pressured to take a plea deal quickly without necessarily getting a thorough defense. It really raises questions about whether the promise of Gideon is being fulfilled in practice for everyone.
Let's look at the broader historical fight for civil rights. The material describes the period after Reconstruction, the Jim Crow era.
Yeah, a really dark period. Segregation enforced by law, upheld by the Supreme Court's separate but equal doctrine in Plessy v. Ferguson, and systematic disenfranchisement of black voters through things like poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, effectively nullifying the 15th Amendment, plus the constant threat of violence.
But the movement for change gained momentum.
Especially after World War II. The contradiction of fighting fascism abroad while having systemic racism at home became harder to ignore. Organizations like the NAACP, Martin Luther King Jr.'s SNCC Corps, they led the charge, often using nonviolent direct action.
The material lists some pivotal moments.
Absolutely. The Brown v. Board of Education decision ending segregation in schools, the Montgomery bus boycott, the courage of the Little Rock Nine integrating a high school, the sit-in movement challenging segregated lunch counters, the Freedom Rides facing brutal violence, the Birmingham campaign, where televised police brutality shocked the nation, and culminating in many ways with the 1963 March on Washington and Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech.
All this pressure led to landmark legislation, the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Yes. President Kennedy proposed it initially. After his assassination, President Lyndon Johnson really used his political muscle to push it through. It faced incredible resistance, especially from Southern Democrats in Congress.
There was a massive filibuster in the Senate, wasn't there?
A huge one, 75 days. It took a bipartisan coalition and a cloture vote, a procedure to end the filibuster to finally break it. That cloture vote itself was historic for a civil rights bill. Johnson signed it into law in July 1964.
What were the main things the act did?
It had several key parts, or titles. Title I addressed unequal voter registration practices, but it wasn't super strong. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was needed for real enforcement there. Title II was huge. It banned discrimination in public accommodations like hotels, restaurants, theaters. This effectively killed Jim Crow segregation laws in public spaces.
And it affected federal funding.
Right. Title VI banned discrimination in any program receiving federal money, schools, hospitals, etc. This gave the federal government significant leverage. And Title VII tackled employment discrimination.
That one seems really important.
It prohibited discrimination in hiring, firing, and other job aspects based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. The inclusion of sex was interesting. The material notes it might have been added by an opponent hoping to derail the bill, but it ended up being a cornerstone for advancing women's rights in the workplace. Title VII also created the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, to investigate complaints.
So a massive impact overall.
Profound. It legally dismantled segregation in public life and opened doors in employment. But, as the material is careful to note, it didn't instantly erase prejudice or solve all systemic inequalities. It's described as a beginning, not an endpoint. Its legacy is still debated and built upon today in discussions about everything from policing reform to affirmative action and even LGBTQ+ rights, citing the Bostock case extending Title VII protections.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, politics, participation, influence. The U.S. is primarily a two-party system.
Largely, yes. Republicans and Democrats dominate. The material links this mainly to our electoral system's single-member districts where winner takes all. It contrasts this with proportional representation systems in other countries, which tend to foster multiple parties. And, of course, American political history has seen major party realignments where the dominant party shifts.
How involved are average Americans in politics?
Voting is the most common form of participation, but turnout is lower than in many established democracies. The material suggests reasons like personal registration requirements, you have to actively register yourself, and the sheer frequency of elections can depress turnout. Generally, it says Americans are only moderately involved, often focused on private life, a reflection of individualism. And worryingly, lower-income individuals participate less, which means their concerns might get less attention.
And campaigns themselves have changed.
Yes, they've become more candidate-centered. Primaries let candidates appeal directly to voters. Media allows direct reach. This can help outsiders, like Donald Trump has mentioned. Parties still matter, fundraising, voter mobilization, but candidates often run their own shows more now.
Money seems critical.
Very significant. Interest groups, especially economic ones, corporations, trade associations, labor unions, are described as the most organized and influential. They lobby Congress, the executive branch, even the courts. Campaign money flows through political action committees, SAGs, often favoring incumbents. And then super PACs, created after the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, can raise and spend unlimited amounts as long as they don't directly coordinate with the candidate.
Does this system represent everyone equally?
Critics cited in the material argue it doesn't. They say it gives disproportionate influence to wealthy individuals and organized corporate interests compared to average citizens.
What about the media's role in all this?
It's evolved dramatically, from a partisan press early on to mass media, now to what's called a high-choice media system. So many options: traditional news, cable news, online sources, social media. This leads to fragmented audiences. Some follow news closely, some get mostly partisan takes, some tune out almost entirely.
Are there concerns about this media landscape?
Yeah, the material raises concerns about declining attention to in-depth news, the ease with which misinformation can spread, and whether shorter attention spans fostered by online media make it harder for people to learn about complex issues. The press has vital roles: the watchdog holding power accountable, the common carrier getting information out, but balancing these with the need to make money in a fractured market is tough. And incivility in media discussions is also noted as a problem. And all this feeds into public opinion, what citizens openly think. Polls try to measure it, though they can have errors. Your opinions are shaped by political socialization, family, school, community, media, leaders, major events. People use different frames of reference, like ideology, although the material suggests most Americans aren't rigidly ideological. Group identity matters a lot. And partisanship. That's described as the biggest dividing line.
Does public opinion actually influence policy?
It does set boundaries. Politicians usually won't stray too far from public sentiment on highly visible issues, but it's a two-way street. Officials also actively try to shape public opinion to support their goals.
Okay, finally, let's touch on the economy and foreign policy aspects covered. How does the government steer the economy?
Two main levers described are fiscal policy and monetary policy. Fiscal is about government taxing and spending decisions made by Congress and the president. Monetary policy is about managing the money supply and credit, and that's primarily the job of the Federal Reserve, or the Fed.
How does the Fed do that?
Mostly by adjusting key interest rates and the reserve requirements for banks. Lowering rates encourages borrowing and spending, raising them cools things down to fight inflation. The material notes the Fed can often act faster with monetary policy than the political branches can with fiscal policy, making it the main day-to-day manager of economic stability.
The material mentions supply-side economics as a specific fiscal policy example.
Right, under Reagan and George W. Bush, the idea was cutting taxes, especially for businesses and higher earners, would stimulate investment and growth. The material points out these tax cuts disproportionately benefited the wealthy and widened the income gap compared to middle-income earners.
And internationally, the U.S. played a big economic role after WWII.
Huge. It basically architected the post-war global trading system. The dollar replaced the British pound as the world's main currency. Programs like the Marshall Plan helped rebuild Europe, which also created vital markets for American products.
And foreign policy itself. Big shifts there, too.
The Cold War dominated from 1945 until about 1990. The main goal was containing the Soviet Union. This led to major military engagements like Korea and Vietnam and sustained high defense spending. After the Cold War, the material notes a shift towards multilateralism, working with other nations like in the Gulf War or interventions in the Balkans. Then, of course, the war on terrorism became the defining focus after the 9/11 attacks in 2001. And the material even looks back to World War I, noting that despite initial neutrality, German actions like unrestricted submarine warfare eventually led President Wilson to ask Congress for a declaration of war in 1917. U.S. involvement was decisive in ending that war.
Wow. Okay, so pulling it all together from this material, we've gone from the basic blueprint of government through rights, politics, influence the economy, and the world stage. It really paints a picture of a complex system, designed with certain principles, but constantly adapting and facing new challenges.
Exactly. You see the structure, federalism, separated powers, checks and balances designed to diffuse power and force deliberation. You see the critical role of the courts in defining rights. You see the messy reality of politics, participation, and unequal influence. And you see how the government interacts with the economy and the wider world. It highlights a system with deep historical roots, but one that's always in motion, always facing debates about power, fairness, and direction.